The moment I said those words, the room went completely silent. Not the polite, uncomfortable silence you get when someone tells a bad joke. Not the awkward pause before people find something safer to talk about. This was the kind of silence that happens when a room full of people suddenly realizes they've been watching the wrong person the whole time. 200 people in a rented ballroom at the Fairmont Chicago Millennium Park. Crystal chandeliers throwing gold light across 12-foot ceilings. Open bar. Catered hors d'oeuvres. A jazz quartet in the corner playing something festive that nobody was really listening to. The kind of corporate Christmas party that exists to remind everyone where they stand in the hierarchy. And I was standing at the bottom of it. Or at least, that's what they all thought. My name is Lawson Briggs. I'm 46 years old. For the past 3 years, I've been the quietest partner at Meridian Peak Capital, a private equity firm based in Chicago's West Loop. We don't advertise. We don't do press releases. We don't show up in Forbes unless we're doing something very intentional. The firms we back go on to become household names. We stay invisible. Which is exactly why, when I walked into that Christmas party as my wife Claudine's +1, holding a glass of sparkling water and wearing a suit I'd had for 4 years, I looked exactly like what everyone assumed I was. Nobody in particular. Before I tell you what happened next, before I tell you what I said to that CEO and why the color left his face the second the words left my mouth, I need to take you back to the beginning. Because what happened that night at the Fairmont didn't start with a Christmas party. It started with a marriage that had been quietly falling apart for 2 years. And it started with a man named Derek Calloway. If you've ever been with someone while they're becoming someone else, you know the feeling I'm talking about. It doesn't happen all at once. It's not a single moment you can point to and say, that's when everything changed. It's a slow accumulation of small things. A different laugh. A new group of friends you've never met. An energy that doesn't belong to you anymore. Claudine and I met 11 years ago at a fundraising dinner for the Chicago Architecture Foundation. She was a financial analyst at a boutique consulting firm, sharp and funny, the kind of woman who could hold 3 conversations at the same time and make each person feel like they were the only one she was talking to. I was 3 years into building what would eventually become my partnership at Meridian Peak, still running on 7 hours of sleep a week and enough ambition to fuel a small city. We were married in the spring, 7 years ago. A ceremony at a restored church on the north side with 140 guests and a reception at a rooftop venue overlooking Lake Michigan. We honeymooned in Portugal. We spent 2 weeks eating grilled fish and drinking white wine and talking about the life we were going to build together. For the first 4 years, we built exactly that. Claudine moved from consulting into corporate development and eventually landed a director of strategic partnerships role at Calloway Group, a mid-size media and technology company founded by its CEO and majority shareholder, Derek Calloway. The firm had offices on the 38th floor of 150 North Riverside, right on the Chicago River. The kind of address that does the talking for you. And Derek Calloway knew how to talk. I met him exactly twice before the Christmas party. Once at a firm dinner Claudine brought me to, and once at a rooftop event for a nonprofit they both supported. Both times he shook my hand, said something polished and forgettable, and moved on to someone more important. He was the kind of man who categorized people within the first 10 seconds of meeting them. I'd seen his type hundreds of times in deal rooms and boardrooms and pitch meetings across Chicago. Men who had built something real but had started confusing their bank account for their character. He was 51, recently divorced, silver-haired, and had the practiced ease of someone who had never once in recent memory felt like the least powerful person in the room. He was wrong, of course. He just never met me in the right context. The changes in Claudine started about 2 years ago. It wasn't dramatic at first. Longer hours at the office, conferences that seemed to multiply, new language filtering into her vocabulary, phrases and references I didn't recognize, connected to people I hadn't met. She started working out more, not the casual evening runs we used to do together along the lakefront path, but early morning sessions at a gym near her office, the kind of place that charges more per month than most people's car payments. I noticed. I'm in the business of noticing things. Due diligence is not just a professional skill. It's a way of seeing the world. But I didn't confront her. Not yet. I watched, and I cataloged, and I kept doing what I always do, which is building the most complete picture possible before making any move. What I built over those 2 years was not a picture I wanted to see. Late texts she took in the bathroom. A second email account on a tablet she thought I didn't know about. A business trip to New York in September that lasted 4 days when the conference she claimed to attend ran for 1.5. The way she started describing Derek Calloway not as her boss but as her mentor, her visionary, the person who really understood her ambitions. I am not a man who makes decisions from emotion. I never have been. In my line of work, that's not a luxury you can afford. You learn to be patient. You learn to wait for the moment when all the information is in and the picture is clear, and then you act with precision. By December, my picture was clear. And then came the Christmas party invitation. Claudine handed it to me on a Tuesday morning, casual, not looking up from her laptop. Derek's throwing the annual Christmas party at the Fairmont. Friday night. You should come. I looked at the embossed card. Calloway Group Annual Holiday Gala. December 19th. Fairmont, Chicago, Millennium Park. Black tie optional. I'll be there, I said. She looked up then, briefly, something flashing across her face that I couldn't quite read. Surprise, maybe, or something closer to miscalculation. Great, she said, and went back to her laptop. I spent the 2 days between that Tuesday morning and Friday evening doing what I'm actually paid to do. Here's something nobody tells you about private equity. The actual deal work, the spreadsheets and the term sheets and the due diligence calls, that's almost secondary. The real work happens in the intelligence. Understanding not just what a company is, but what it's becoming. Who's actually driving it? Where the pressure points are? What's being hidden in the numbers that the numbers aren't showing? I'd been watching Calloway Group for 18 months, not because of Claudine. Before she ever started working there, one of our portfolio companies had explored a content partnership with them, and the deal had fallen apart for reasons I never found fully satisfying. So I kept a passive eye on them. And what I'd been seeing over the past 6 months had become very interesting. Derek Calloway owned 62% of his company outright. The remaining 38% was split between 3 early investors and a small employee stock pool. The company had reported strong revenues for 3 consecutive years. On paper, it looked healthy. But there's what a company reports, and there's what a company is. The firm that had been their primary advertising revenue source had just restructured its marketing budget. A key licensing agreement that represented nearly a third of Calloway Group's annual income was up for renewal in February, and the counterparty had been quietly exploring alternatives for months. And Calloway himself had taken on personal debt against his equity stake to fund what appeared to be a speculative real estate development project on the south side of the city that was, as of last week, significantly underwater. I'd spent Thursday night on the phone with 2 sources. One was a former CFO of a company I'd backed years ago, who now worked in media finance. The other was a lawyer at a firm that had done secondary work for one of Calloway's original investors. By Friday morning, I knew exactly what Derek Calloway's company was worth, what it was about to be worth, and what levers would need to move to make the gap between those 2 numbers very, very large. I put on my 4-year-old suit. I straightened my tie in the hallway mirror. I looked at myself for a long moment, and then I went to the Christmas party. Before I tell you what happened next, if this story is hitting close to home, if you've ever been in a room where someone decided you weren't worth respecting, please subscribe to this channel and leave a comment below. Because what I'm about to tell you is the part of this story that nobody saw coming. Not Claudine, not Derek Calloway, and honestly, not even me. The Fairmont's grand ballroom on the evening of December 19th looked exactly like what it was. A very expensive attempt to make corporate obligation feel like celebration. White linen tablecloths, centerpieces made of frosted branches and white roses. A DJ setup in the far corner running soft instrumental versions of Christmas songs. Tables assigned by department, which meant the room was organized less like a party and more like an org chart you could walk through. Claudine looked beautiful, and I want to say that honestly, without bitterness. She was wearing a deep green dress I hadn't seen before, heels I didn't recognize, jewelry that caught the light in a way that suggested they were new. She moved through that room with the ease of someone who belonged there, greeting colleagues by name, laughing at the right moments, touching arms and making connections with the fluid precision of someone who had been practicing this version of herself for a while. I followed. I got a drink. I found a spot near the edge of the room where I could see everything, and I waited. I am very good at waiting. Derek Calloway arrived 40 minutes in, the way people like Derek Calloway always arrive, 15 minutes after the optimal moment, surrounded by just enough entourage to mark the entrance without looking like he was trying. He was wearing a perfectly tailored black suit with an open collar, the kind of studied casual that says I'm too successful to bother with a tie. He worked the room with the practiced efficiency of someone who had thrown this party 9 times and knew exactly which handshakes mattered. I watched him. I watched Claudine watching him. I watched the moment he spotted her across the room and the way his expression shifted into something warmer, more deliberate. He crossed to her. They embraced with the familiarity of people who had done it many times before. I watched from my spot near the window, drink in hand, face neutral. Then he saw me. I could see the calculation happen in real time, the quick assessment, the categorization. He leaned down and said something to Claudine, too quiet for me to catch, and she laughed. A real laugh, not her polite one, the kind she used to give me. He guided her toward me with his arm around her waist, moving like a man who owned everything in the room and was simply showing a guest around his property. "You must be Lawson," he said, extending a hand. His grip was the kind that squeezes slightly harder than necessary. A dominance tell so well documented at this point, it should come with footnotes. "Derek," I said, "I've heard a lot about you." "I'm sure you have," he said, and smiled the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. He looked at me the way people look at something they've already dismissed. "Claudine tells me you're in finance." "Something like that," I said. He glanced around at the people nearby, who had drifted into listening range with the easy curiosity of a crowd that can smell something interesting. Then he looked back at me, and his smile widened. "She also told me you've been having kind of a rough patch lately. Work-wise." He said it with a sympathy so false it was almost impressive. "Tough business, private equity. Lots of up and down. It has its cycles," I said. He put his arm back around Claudine's waist. She didn't step away. And then he did it. He turned to the people around him, which now included maybe 20 of Claudine's colleagues, a few senior leadership types, 2 people I recognized from Calloway Group's board, and said, loud enough to carry, "You know what I think? I think Claudine deserves a lot of credit for carrying the household while her husband figures out his next chapter." He laughed, that easy, confident laugh that fills rooms. "Because from what I hear, he's basically been a passenger for the last 2 years. Broke, clingy, and—" He paused for effect, which is the move of a man who thinks he's the smartest person in the room. "Completely forgettable." He looked at me with something that was almost pity. "No offense," he said. "I'm just being honest. You're like a sad little trophy she keeps in the basement. Everyone here knows it." The room laughed, some of them nervously, some of them freely. I looked at Claudine. She laughed, not loudly, not cruelly. But she laughed, and that one sound told me everything the last 2 years of watching and cataloging and building my picture had been leading me toward. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water. Then I looked at Derek Calloway, and I smiled. "Funny you should describe it that way," I said. "Because from where I'm standing, you're just another man who's about to watch 95% of his company dissolve." The smile stayed on his face, but something behind his eyes shifted. "Excuse me?" he said. "Pinnacle Advertising," I said, keeping my voice easy and conversational, the same register you'd use to comment on the weather. "They restructured their marketing budget in November. Your contract with them, which represents somewhere around 18% of your annual revenue, is not being renewed in Q1. I spoke to their CFO 2 months ago about a completely unrelated deal." The smile was gone now, not slowly, all at once. "The licensing agreement with North Shore Media," I continued. "The one that's up in February. They've been in talks with Vertex Creative since September. I know their lead counsel." Derek Calloway was very still. "And the Archer Street development," I said. "The residential project you funded by leveraging your equity stake. The construction cost overruns put it underwater by approximately $11 million as of last week. The bank holding that note sent a notice of default on December 12th. I paused. I know someone on their commercial lending committee. The room was so quiet I could hear the jazz quartet in the far corner still playing, completely oblivious. So when you talk about what Claudine deserves, I said, I'd think carefully about who in this room is actually the passenger. Because in about 60 days, Callaway Group is going to need a capital infusion or a buyer, and the number you're going to hear from every firm you call is going to be a very uncomfortable percentage of what you think your company is worth. I put my drink down on the nearest table. It was good to meet you properly, I said, and I walked out of the ballroom. I took the elevator to the lobby and walked out onto East Monroe Street. The December air off Lake Michigan was sharp enough to sting, and I stood on the sidewalk for a few minutes, just breathing it, watching the lights of the city reflect off the ice that had started forming along the edges of Millennium Park's skating rink. My phone buzzed within 3 minutes, a number I didn't recognize. I answered. Mr. Briggs. The voice was careful, measured. My name is Paul Rector. I'm the general counsel for Callaway Group. I apologize for reaching out this evening. I got your number from a mutual contact. I understand you and Derek had an exchange tonight at the holiday event. We did, I said. He'd like to know if you'd be willing to sit down early next week. I thought about that for a moment. Tell him Tuesday, I said. Our office is on Adams Street, 9 in the morning. I'll make sure he's there, Paul Rector said. I hung up and stood there in the cold for a while longer. What I need to tell you now is something I've never said out loud to anyone but my brother, who runs a commercial construction company in Oak Park, and is the most honest person I know. And I need to say it because I think it's the part of this story that actually matters. Walking out of that ballroom did not feel like winning. I want you to understand that. Movies would tell you there's a music cue at that moment, some kind of swell that tells you the hero just reclaimed something. Real life doesn't have music cues. Real life has cold December air and the sound of your own footsteps and the knowledge that the thing you just said in there, however true, however precisely aimed, doesn't fix the thing that's actually broken. Claudine laughed. That's the sentence that stayed with me standing on Monroe Street. Not Derek Callaway's pale face. Not the silence that followed my words. Not the certainty I felt when I laid out exactly what I knew his company was worth. That stuff was almost incidental. What I kept coming back to was the fact that my wife laughed. I called my brother from the car. How'd it go? Nathan asked. He knew I was going to the party. He's the only person who knows everything. Exactly like I thought it would, I said. You, okay? I thought about that for a long moment, watching the city lights slide past the window as my Uber moved north on Michigan Avenue. I don't know yet, I said honestly. That's what I want to tell you. Because the people in the other scripts I've heard, the other stories, they always seem to have this clarity. This clean moment of triumph that erases everything before it. And I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that's what this was. Knowing that Derek Callaway's company was in freefall didn't change the fact that my wife had been laughing with another man at a party where she was supposed to be standing next to me. Some truths run parallel and don't cancel each other out. The Tuesday meeting was everything I expected. Derek Callaway arrived at our offices on Adams Street at 8:57, which told me he'd spent the whole weekend deciding whether punctuality would read as strength or desperation, and had landed on something in between. He brought Paul Rector and a woman I didn't recognize who turned out to be his personal financial advisor. I brought 2 of my partners, Sloan Whitfield, who has been closing distressed asset deals for 22 years and has the energy of someone who genuinely enjoys the smell of a company that's about to fold, and Grant Okafor, who does our legal structuring and whose poker face is so complete that I've never once, in 8 years, known what he was actually thinking. The meeting lasted 3 hours. Derek Callaway spent the first 45 minutes trying to reframe the conversation, which is what people do when they want to control something that's already past controlling. He brought revenue projections that didn't account for the Pinnacle gap. He minimized the North Shore situation. He didn't mention the Archer Street default at all until Sloan mentioned it, very calmly, by name, at which point the financial advisor looked at the table. Then he asked what I was proposing. I laid it out. Meridian Peak would acquire a controlling stake in Callaway Group at a valuation reflecting its actual current condition rather than its reported one. That valuation was 62% below what Derek Callaway had been telling his board the company was worth. Callaway himself would retain a 5% ownership position, a seat on a restructured board with no operational authority, and an advisory role during a 12-month transition. He would own 5% of a company he had built from nothing. He sat with that for a long moment. "You came to that party knowing this," he said. It wasn't a question. "I came to that party as my wife's guest," I said. "You made it something else." He looked at me across the conference table, and for the first time, I saw the man behind the performance. He was tired. He was scared. And he was smart enough to know he had no real leverage left. "I want to apologize," he said, "for what I said at the party." "That's not a term of the deal," I said. "Whether you apologize or don't, changes nothing about the numbers." He nodded slowly. "I'll need until Thursday," he said. "You have until Wednesday at noon," Sloane said, without looking up from her notes. He called at 11:47 Wednesday morning. He accepted the terms. Claudine and I had a conversation 4 days after the Christmas party. Not the night of the party, because she didn't come home until past midnight and I was asleep, or at least giving a convincing impression of it. Not the next day, because we moved around the apartment like two planets in orbits that had stopped intersecting. On Sunday evening, she sat down across from me at the kitchen table and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. It wasn't guilt, exactly. It was something closer to calculation. The same look I'd seen her put on in business meetings when she was trying to decide the best angle. "I didn't know you were going to do that," she said. "I know," I said. "Everyone's been talking about it." "I imagine they have." She was quiet for a moment. "Derek called me Saturday morning." "I know that too," I said. I did. His call to her cell had lasted 14 minutes. She'd taken it in the bedroom with the door closed. "Lawson." She said my name the way people say it when they want it to do the heavy lifting for everything they're not ready to say directly. "This isn't just about the party." "No," I said. "It isn't." She looked at her hands for a moment. "I don't know when I stopped being happy," she said. "I want you to know that it wasn't a decision I made. It just happened." I've thought about that sentence a lot since she said it. It just happened. As if the choices she had made over the past 2 years were weather. As if the weekend in New York, and the second email account, and the laugh at the Christmas party were things that had occurred to her rather than things she had done. "I know," I said. And then, because I meant it, "I'm not angry." She looked up. "I was," I said, "for a long time. But at some point it stopped being anger and started being information. And information I can work with." "What does that mean?" "It means I think we both know what we're doing next. And I think we've both known for a while." She was quiet for a long moment. "I'm sorry," she said. And I believe she was. Not for the right reasons, maybe. Or not only for the right reasons. But she was sorry. "I know," I said. "I'm sorry too. For whatever I couldn't be or couldn't see or stopped being along the way." We sat at that table for another hour without talking, the way people do when there's nothing left to negotiate and no one's pretending anymore. It was the most honest hour we'd had together in years. The divorce was clean because I made it clean. I wasn't interested in punishment. I wasn't interested in leverage or theater or the kind of prolonged legal combat that makes lawyers wealthy and leaves the people fighting it hollow. Claudine and I had assets we'd built together, and we divided them fairly. She kept the apartment. I moved into a place on the 23rd floor of a building in Streeterville with a view of the lake that I hadn't let myself want when we were married, because she'd wanted to stay in Lincoln Park. It's a good view. The Callaway Group acquisition closed in February. What I hadn't told anyone, including Derek Callaway, was that we had a strategic buyer lined up before the deal was even signed. A larger media holding company that had been circling Callaway's content library for 2 years, but couldn't stomach the valuation Derek had been insisting on. With us controlling the position, the deal closed fast and clean. The buyer paid a number that, after all the restructuring, returned our acquisition cost almost entirely, and left a residual stake worth considerably more than Derek's 5% had been when we bought it. He did the math eventually. He called me in March. "You made money on my company," he said. "We usually do," I said. A pause. "You knew about the buyer before the Tuesday meeting." I knew about the buyer before the Christmas party, I said. Another pause, longer this time. You're a precise man, he said. I try to be, I said. He hung up. No anger this time, I noticed. Just a kind of grudging recognition that happens when someone realizes they've been in a room with a chess player and only understood it after the game was over. My brother Nathan came into the city for a Saturday in March. We had breakfast at the Publican on Fulton Market, the kind of place where the menu is written on a chalkboard and the coffee is better than it has any right to be. We ordered eggs and sausage and sat by the window watching the West Loop foot traffic move past in the early spring cold. You good? He asked. Same question he always asks. Yeah, I said. This time I meant it. The deal closed clean? Very clean. He nodded, wrapping both hands around his coffee mug. Nathan has worked with his hands his whole career, and he has the hands to show for it. Wide and calloused, permanently bearing the evidence of his actual work. He looked at me across the table with the particular look of an older brother who has been watching you his entire life. You know what I kept thinking about? He said. When you told me what that guy said at the party. That whole broke, clingy, forgettable thing. What? I kept thinking about Dad. He smiled, a small one. Our father had worked 30 years as a machinist in Gary, Indiana, had never earned more than $50,000 in a single year, had raised 3 kids in a house that needed more repairs than he could keep up with, and had died at 71, having never once made anyone in a ballroom feel small. He would have walked out of that room too. He would have done it a lot faster than me, I said. Nathan laughed. Yeah, he absolutely would have. We finished breakfast. We walked down Fulton and over toward the river, the way we used to walk everywhere when we were kids because neither of us had a car. The Chicago River was still showing ice along the edges, but the center was moving, dark and cold and indifferent to everything happening on its banks. You miss her? Nathan asked. I thought about that honestly. I miss who I thought she was, I said. I'm not sure that's the same thing. He nodded. That was the right answer. Nathan has always known when the right answer has been given, and he doesn't push past it. I want to tell you something about the night of the Christmas party. Something I haven't told you yet. When I walked back through the lobby of the Fairmont and out onto Monroe Street, before I called my brother, before the Uber, before any of it, I stood on the sidewalk for about 3 minutes and did something I am not usually a man who does. I felt it. All of it. The whole weight of 2 years of watching and knowing and not saying. The laugh that Claudine let happen. The satisfaction of watching Derek Calloway's face go from performance to panic in about 8 seconds. The cold air. The lights on the ice. The fact that I was 46 years old and standing alone outside a Christmas party in a 4-year-old suit on a Friday night. I let myself feel all of it. Not to wallow. Not to spiral. Just to make sure I wasn't skipping past something important. Because here's the thing I've learned in 20 years of doing what I do, looking at companies, looking at numbers, looking at people, and trying to see past what they're presenting to what's actually there. The most expensive mistake a person can make is confusing what they've won for what actually mattered. I won that room in a very real, very practical sense. I knew something Derek Calloway didn't know I knew, and I used it with precision at the exact moment he assumed he had all the power. That's real. I'm not pretending otherwise, but I also lost something in that room. Not to Derek Calloway, not to Claudine. I'd already lost it long before that night, probably. I'd lost the marriage I thought I had. The version of us that used to run together along the lake and argue about dinner and stay up too late talking about things that didn't matter, and were therefore exactly the things that did. Both of those things are true at the same time. You can be right and still grieve what being right cost you. There's one more thing I want to tell you. In April, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. A Chicago area code, but not one I knew. I answered. Mr. Briggs? A woman's voice. Professional, clear. My name is Renata Cole. I'm a portfolio manager at Lakeview Capital. We have a mutual contact who suggested I reach out. We're looking at a minority position in a content technology company, and I'd value your perspective on the space. I have some time Thursday afternoon, I said. 2 o'clock. That works, she said. I'll come to you. She showed up to our Adams Street offices at 1:58, which I noted, because it's the kind of thing I notice. She was 42, direct in the way that people who are very good at their jobs become direct, the kind of person who doesn't waste the first 5 minutes of a meeting establishing credentials because the credentials speak clearly enough on their own. She knew the company she was asking about better than most people at her level would bother to, and she pushed back on 2 of my points in a way that was correct and well-sourced. After an hour, she stood up to leave and then turned back at the door. "The Callaway Group deal," she said. "I read about it in the trade press. The way it was structured was unusual." "We find unusual structures work better," I said. She nodded, studying me with the same evaluating attention I recognized, because I use it myself. "Unusual usually means the person running the deal knew something everyone else didn't," she said. "Sometimes," I said. She smiled. "I'll be in touch, Mr. Briggs." She was, but that's a different story for a different day. My name is Lawson Briggs. I'm 46 years old. I'm a private equity partner in Chicago, Illinois. 6 months ago, a man in a rented ballroom looked at me in front of 200 people and called me broke, clingy, and forgettable, while my wife stood next to him and laughed. What I want to tell you, the thing I would go back and say to myself standing on Monroe Street in the December cold, is this. Being invisible is not the same as being nothing. The most powerful position in any room is the one where you know more than anyone else about what's actually happening, and you choose, carefully and deliberately, when to use that knowledge. I had been invisible in that ballroom for 40 minutes. Nobody looked at me twice. Nobody included me in a conversation that mattered. I was exactly what they assumed I was. And then I wasn't. There will be a night in your life. Maybe it's already happened. Maybe it's coming. Where someone in a room full of people decides to make you the example. Decides to use you as proof of something. Decides that you are the least important person in the space. Let them. Let them make that calculation. Let them get comfortable in it. Let them do the thing that people do when they believe they've correctly identified who they're dealing with. And then, when the moment is exactly right, show them who you actually are. Not for revenge. Not for the audience. Not even for yourself, really. Show them because the truth has a way of insisting on itself eventually. And the only question is whether you're ready when it does. I was ready. And I am still standing. It wasn't the revenge. It wasn't the deal or the boardroom or watching that CEO's face go pale. It was the fact that Lawson spent 2 years knowing and said nothing. Not because he was weak, because he was waiting for the right moment. Most of us, the second we feel disrespected, we react. We fire back immediately. We want people to know we know. But real confidence doesn't need an audience. It just needs timing. The most powerful thing you can do when someone underestimates you is let them. Keep building. Keep watching. And when the moment is right, you won't need to raise your voice. The room will go quiet all on its own. That's the lesson I took from Lawson's story anyway. What did you take from it? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. And if stories like this are what you're here for, make sure you're subscribed. I post every week, and trust me, the next one is going to hit even harder.